All right, good afternoon, everyone. I think I should stop sharing for now. Good afternoon, everyone. I think it's 12 o'clock, so we can officially begin. My name is Sheila Oj, communication specialist for Jobberman Nigeria. And today we are having a very, very interesting women-only event on breaking the myth of the female boss. It's actually a very, very interesting topic, and I'm looking forward to what Tolagbe Martins has to share with us today. But before we begin, I'm just going to share my screen briefly. So we just talk about what Jobberman is about, who we are, if you don't know already, and then we will take it from there. Okay, so about Jobberman. Jobberman is #1 online recruitment platform in Nigeria with over 2 million candidates on our platform and over 60,000 employers. Our goal is to create job opportunities for young people, basically connecting the right talents to the right jobs. Jobberman Youth Engagement, which is the team that has put this event together, is committed to training 5 million young people and placing 3 million of them in dignified work within the next 5 years. Also, the Jobberman Youth Engagement and Learning Team provides free training for young people within the ages of 18 to 35. And that is our Jobberman Soft Skills Training, which you can find on Coursera, on Thinkific. So if you want to register for the soft skills training, it's just jobberman.com/soft skills. So today, just like I mentioned, jobberman.com/soft skills, and then you'll be able to register for the soft skills class. So today, I'm just going to skip this part about the outline and just go straight to it. So today we have with us the fantastic and delectable Tolagbe Martins. I'm actually going to have her introduce herself. I don't see any reason for me to read out her profile, so she will introduce herself and then tell us, who she is, what she does, and then we now go straight into the session of breaking the myth of the female bosses. I know when we put this up on socials, there are quite a number of people that had comments like, oh yes, female bosses are a thorn in the flesh. Somebody actually said they're a thorn in the flesh. Another person was like, oh yes, they're very this, they're very that. So today I'm actually very interested in knowing what this myth is and also how we can break the stereotype, whatever the stereotype is, and if there's actually a stereotype. So over to you, Tolagbe. I'm going to stop sharing and then I will, okay, there we go. I think you can share now, Tolagbe. Yes.
Can everyone see this?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Perfect.
So good afternoon. So I mean, first off, I'm going to share my slide, but I think the first big relief about today was I was invited by someone I used to manage. So I think if nothing else, that's some consolation that I'm not the monster that maybe I might have been portrayed to be. So I think I'm not in the bad boss category, at least not today. Thank you so much to Jobberman. Thank you, Sheila, and thank you to everyone for this opportunity. It's one that I was really taken aback by, because this myth, it's not something I've ever been confronted with, to be if I'm being candid. But it was a real challenge to explore and to sort of decide on what we were going to talk about today. So I mean, as Sheila has already said, my name is Tolagbe Martins. I've worked over the years as a communications and strategy professional. I currently work as the public sector growth lead for Helium Health, which is a medical technology firm. And they have a particular mission of driving the adoption of tech in healthcare. across Africa. I have a background in social psychology, and that is pretty much the common thread of everything I've ever done, which is I tend to draw connections and try to make things bigger than the sum of their parts. And I've done that in aviation, in healthcare, in logistics, events, hospitality, governance, and public policy. When I write it like this, I realize it's been it's been a long time and it's been many different things, but here we are. So we don't actually have much time, and I really would like us to be able to have conversation. So I really want to kind of rattle through this a little bit. So what are the myths about female bosses? Very few of them are flattering. So we are told that women just work for whatever allowances they can get. Women are always falling ill, and then when they're not ill, they're pregnant. And when they're pregnant, they're bitchy. And while they're bitchy, they are subject to raging hormones and moods. They're moody. You know, the moody cow, the grumpy. You know, there are all these epithets about women who are working. And then when they are nice, they must, of course, be seductive, or they must be chasing the wives of the men that they are working with. And then the ones who aren't doing that are thinking only of their children at home, because after all, that is where they should be. And then the rest, the few good ones, perhaps they don't really have much ambition, and or are unserious or unreliable. So this is the picture of what happens to the female boss. I will begin to unpack why there is so much cognitive dissonance. And what does cognitive dissonance mean? It means when you're holding two opposite ideas in your head at the same time. Because really and truly, how can one creation be all these things? Is it actually possible? All these things at the same time? So let's look at what happens. So like most things, I like to go back and I say, let's start with myths and legends. Where did these stereotypes actually come from? You know, there's an apple there, and if I were in class, I'd ask anybody here now, why do you think I put an apple when we're talking about women and we're talking about myths? Of course, it's because, as the French say, cherchez la femme, which is a direct translation of find the woman. And it's a phrase which means when you get to the bottom of any big problem, any war, any crisis, any chaos, there was a man frustrated by a woman. Cherchez la femme. And to me, that summarizes our immense, and I'm happy that this is a women-only forum. I will be speaking to Sheila about how we're going to have to open this up at some point later on. But for today, I really am happy that this is a women-only forum. Firstly, because I really like women, and nature has punished me by giving me 2 sons, but here we are. I really, really like women. So, cherchez la femme. The idea being that at the center of any chaos or any problem, there was a woman. So the reason why we are all suffering and we're not in the Garden of Eden chilling today is because of a woman, right? That's the cradle of most of these myths. And that's the birth of most of the stereotypes about women. So what are stereotypes? Because, we talk about stereotypes, we fling them around. Stereotypes they're not actually in and of themselves a bad thing. They're a tool to process multiplicities of information that is coming to you in everyday life. Stereotypes are important because they help you break down. Your mind is moving at the speed of whatever it's moving at, but stereotypes help. Stranger, bad. Big, dangerous, quiet, safe. These are things that have helped us to survive. They're evolutionary traits that have got us to where we are today. So a stereotype in and of itself is not a bad thing. And so when you think about women, I go back to, if I were to go back, I would say, yes, women kind, women gentle, women seductive, women weak. Weak because they are usually biologically weaker and therefore must be protected. Nurturing because they are the primary child bearer and child carer. But what is the problem? The problem is when you take that stereotype and you apply it as if there is no nuance, there is no context, and what happens here must happen forever and ever till we all die. Whether or not technology comes and assumes some of those responsibilities, whether or not the world evolves beyond that particular place. And that's where we find ourselves as women in the workplace. We are caught, trapped in between myths, legends, tradition, religion, culture, and science and technology. So, one of the biggest revolutionary things about women in the workplace, for example, was the discovery of the contraceptive pill. So suddenly, women could control their childbearing. Women could control when they were getting pregnant. You need to see, and if this were, if we were in a university level course, I would be pulling up now images of the papers and how everybody was convinced this was going to end the world. And what have we seen instead? We've seen that the metrics for women have improved time on time as technology and as life has allowed us to begin to actually be at par. Because what are we talking about at the end of the day? We're talking about parity. But we face ourselves with the situation where old habits die hard. The workplace is relatively fixed. It hasn't moved at the pace at which everything else has moved. So, in a nutshell, inequality in workplaces didn't happen overnight and therefore will not be diminished without effort. So I say this to you as a woman talking to other women to understand that we are facing these myths, these legends have taken on very real form because they have translated into policy. And so we are going to have to confront them systematically. It's not going to be the waving of a wand. So I'm going to delve into some of the myths. B is for bossy. And I can assure you that bossy was not my first B, but it ended up being the political B since we are in the workplace after all. So B is for bossy. Because women are bossy, but men are decisive. I think the recent United States presidential elections really brings this home. Sorry? Did someone say something?
No, you can go ahead. Please, can we all mute our, I think we're all muted, so you can go ahead, yes.
So the recent presidential elections really demonstrated this. Perhaps 2020, this particular election showed one facet of it. But if we go back to the 2016 US elections, we saw how much when we had a capable, competent candidate such as Hillary Clinton against a Donald Trump, and yet everything she did was amplified and viewed under a microscope, such that if she said people who believed in racist tropes were a basket of deplorables, she could never get away from something like that. Whereas Trump could say all Mexicans are rapists and there would be no repercussions. This particular trait of B is for bossy, where the same action will be perceived differently depending on whether the actor is a man or a woman, is a very strong bias that we continue to struggle with. Because at the end of the day, gender beliefs shape our culture, they shape the business world, they shape our behavior. So what we know, and there was a recent study about this where a teacher's assistant, so in the US system, a professor will often have an assistant who helps with grading, corresponding with students, following up on their assignments and so on, because of course a professor is busy. So they carried out an experiment in the last semester where the TA, teacher's assistant, had two personas. One was as a male TA and the other was as a female TA. And they split the class into the two cohorts, and the same individual was corresponding with both people. And the responses were more aggressive, more condescending, more patronizing to the woman TA. When they asked the students to rank the TA, remember, same person, the TA scored almost a full quartile, that's 25% lower on each attribute. This is a person who is treating everybody exactly the same. but because he or she was perceived in one gender or another, the reaction was different. And I think understanding this, that when you say something, there's another effect where we talk about in the boardroom, where a woman will say something and then a man will repeat it, 10 minutes later, and everyone will behave like it was the best idea. You have to realize that you are confronting such bias, such that almost anything you say or do is perceived through a lens of prejudice. B is for bossy. I'm not actually going to prescribe, this is not a prescriptive thing, so I'm not going to say what we are going to do about it. Right now, I'm just telling you what we are facing. Sorry, I'm struggling a bit with my screen. Next. It's not in alphabetical order, by the way. So E is for emotional. And again, this is the stereotype where we are told that women are too emotional and too hormonal because, she could be having a bad day. She could be PMSing today. We're too emotional, too hormonal to manage large, complex situations. So the expectations of women, as I said, remain rooted in these traditional ideas. There was a time when women who were undergoing their menses used to retreat to a tent. In some cultures, that is still the case. As recently as last year, women in India challenged this particular restriction for the temple and won, because under today's human rights laws, restricting women from a particular place just because they're going through the time of the month is actually unconstitutional. So they won. Emotional intelligence has actually been viewed as one of the most critical leadership qualities for success. So it's completely ironic that women are being accused of being emotional, and yet everything we know about behavioral science and leadership today demonstrates that the most successful leader does not have to be the smartest person in the room, does not have to have all the facts. What he or she or they need to actually do is have the emotional intelligence to bring everybody together as a leader and make sure that you get the best success outcomes. So the quality that has been pilloried and made out to be a bad thing is actually, surprise, surprise, one of the most important things that we need to have. Emotional intelligence, being able to read the room. And again, it's interesting that these are things that gender socializes us to do almost instinctively. So as a young girl, you are taught, to wait when your parent comes home and you have a request. To wait. To take off their shoes. To help them maybe go and run their bath. To just generally maybe make sure that they have a cold drink. Make sure if it's your dad, make sure he has his favorite beer. Make sure you have been groomed to anticipate and to predict how someone's emotions are going to affect the outcome. How can this be a negative in the workplace? The answer is it can't. It can only be a positive. F is for family. And of course, this is always the problem. I'm not going to hire her because she's going to be pregnant and she's going to have babies. Family responsibilities prevent women from succeeding in top-level executive jobs. So the question is, do they really prevent women? Is it the family situation, or is it the unfriendly work situation, or the unfriendly cultural situation that prevents women from succeeding in top-level executive jobs? What do the statistics say? What does the culture say? What does the research show? So the research shows that in actual fact, moms in the workplace get things done because they tend to be more goal-oriented and productive. What they won't do is spend every weekend and every evening and all the time on the phone, perhaps going over something that has already been clarified. So they're not going to pander to this new 24/7, always available, work around the clock culture. And that is what motherhood, or parenthood, I should say, is coming against so much. Parents are finding that, And I think it's funny how COVID has actually demonstrated this so effectively, that we don't need to be in the office 12 hours a day. We don't need to be working all weekends. You can actually be very focused and very productive and very targeted. And that's something that parents have had to do for a long time. And because mothers bear the load of childbearing, that particular skill set is something that mothers have had to learn to do. So what are the facts? The facts are actually that 65% of mothers with children aged 18 or younger are employed. But the nuance that is not captured here is that this stops at a particular level, because after a point in time, the parameters for promotion and for elevation become non-work based. They become your ability to go for drinks after work. They become your ability to go to the country club in a place where there is a strong bias. They become your ability to go around and, you know, go in big boys clubs, going drinking or whatever. So the reality here is that if we are to measure those work for work, output for output, it is likely that women will succeed. But when you use a different set of metrics, late night socializing, after hours meetings, even going on a boys' weekend, of course, by and large, women are not going to be able to match up to those particular expectations and therefore will miss out on these promotions. So as employers and as people who are driving a culture, it is on us to also improve the culture so that we can measure these soft skills in different ways that don't require people to be at work till 2 or 3 in the morning or, you know, all weekends, because that's just the reality of where we find ourselves. So as I had said before, the goal was to really try not to be too prescriptive, but to have a conversation. And what I have found is that there are particular strategies that one can employ to combat some of these biases. I've referenced some as I've been speaking, but I actually did a list of 3, what I would call 3 critical strategies that one can play to beat this bias in the workplace. The first is that you must be flexible. And what do I mean by that? There are many ways to approach something. You have a target, you can see the target. The straight way might not necessarily be the most appropriate for you. You may want to look at your role. When opportunities come out that might make you pivot, but then might give you a bit more flexibility to manage the realities of your life. You want to look at those positions carefully, because ultimately you're trying to build your value, continue to develop your footprint, and make sure that you will still get to where you're going, albeit maybe not at the same pace as somebody else. So a sideways role, a less glamorous one, may ultimately serve you in the long run. Educate yourself. Be direct. There is no escaping the need to be twice as good. And I think I've tried really hard to demonstrate the extent of bias and the extent of culture that we're working against. So it's naive to think that you can get away with half-done work, improperly researched data, whatever your responsibilities are. There is no escaping the fact that you will constantly have to prove your mettle. And that will be a continuous thing. When you walk into a room, people will be distracted, whether by your accent or by what you're wearing or the weave that you have on or what you don't have on or your choice of hairstyle or your whatever. So constantly proving yourself and proving your mettle and being on top of your subject matter, there is no negotiating on that. There are no halfway points. You just have to do it. You just have to be ready to do that work. Because really and truly, when you do that work and you're very direct about having done that work and you're uncompromising about having done that work, people are watching, and that's something to never forget. And it actually takes me very nicely to my next and third strategy, which is that you make allies. Nobody is saying be the office house help, but help will come from unexpected places. And I'll give an example of that. some of you may know of Mrs. Ibukwa Woshika, who's the chairperson of First Bank. She tells a story of how she was making a bid for a particular then game-changing contract for her new furniture organization. And it was the security guard at the premises where she had been going for ages, that she had always had a nice word, a kind word, a hello for, a prayer, not even necessarily a tip. But, she noticed him, she recognized him. She was able to ask him about his family, exchanging the usual pleasantries. She noticed him. And so on this fateful day, he made sure that her bid got submitted. And this is what we mean about making allies. You have to utilize your strengths. Your strengths are in most, and you see, I hesitate to stereotype because not all women want to be touchy-feely or friendly, but I really think that our proclivity or our tendency, our socialization makes us at least to be able to give that affect. So make allies. Help will come from unexpected places. Information will come from unexpected places. Being present in all those places has a way of propelling you. Because as I said, you're not always going to be able to go straight to the target. There are times when you're going to have to come sideways. And so when you are confronted with your strategies, sometimes this isn't going to work. Sometimes you're going to have to, be skillful about it. So that was actually my last slide, because I really wanted us to open this up to conversations and questions. And I reckoned if we had an hour, then we had 30 minutes to get through the slides and 30 minutes to talk.
Well, thank you so much for that. If you have any questions, because there are a few people online now, if you have any questions, please just put it in the group chat, and then, we will obviously answer them. Now, my first question for you is, first of all, you put so much into it, and so I'm listening to what you're saying, and I'm thinking women do actually have to deal with a lot of premeditated, but like stereotypes. It's like they're prejudged on things just by being a woman. Like the moment you walk into the door, you're a woman, and they already start putting you in boxes, right? So where exactly does this myth come from that female bosses are mean? I mean, if we've had to go through all this, if we've had to sort of find our way to the top, or like work our way to the top, right? This impression that most female bosses, because I don't like to generalize, but this impression that most female bosses are actually mean, or like a thorn in the flesh, like the person that commented on Instagram.
Yes, I saw
that. Where does that come from? Like, where do you think that has come from? Where has that stemmed from over the years?
So like most things, a myth is, there is always a nugget of truth. And something you will find, there are certain items. I want to use an example from nature. There are certain things that if you freeze them, right? If they get frozen, they get brittle and then they snap, right? Some people have found that the way in which they've been able to get to that boss point is by embodying characteristics that may not be natural to them. Now, first of all, I think I'm going to pause and I'm going to give a caveat. There are assholes across every gender spectrum, right? I think there are mean people everywhere, across every hue. So let's make sure that we establish that, right? So let's put that to one side. And then we'll go back to the fact that for some women, I'm sorry, some women, okay. It's my very authoritative laptop. Some women in some fields have found that their coping mechanism has been to try to be tougher than, to be tougher than the toughest there. than to compete on those particular qualities. So you're mean, I'm going to be meaner. You're tough, I'm going to be tougher. Never let them see you cry. Never let them see you be vulnerable. I think it's a real luxury to be in this particular century. And I say this because my mother's a medical doctor, and she talks about being a medical student in Nigeria in the 70s. She said you learned very quickly not to answer questions, or just answer questions with yes and no. Because if you give too many details, if you show too much knowledge, right? If you show that you've done the work, you will have problems later on. Now imagine being a woman in such a hostile environment. So there's 70 odd students and there's 5 women. Imagine not being, we can't even fathom this, and this is only what, 40 years ago, that you would be in the lecture theater and not feel like you couldn't answer the question, because if you got it right, somebody will be waiting to sabotage you in the next experiment. So depending on how you've got to the top, so to answer the question, depending on how you got there, you may have picked up negative coping strategies. And by this point, they've become baked in and they've become habit. And so that's why you're a mean boss, because you had to elbow your way into everywhere, force your way into everything, and you don't actually know any other way. It's like a trauma response. You don't know any other way.
It's almost like survival of the fittest, really.
Exactly. And so what has happened is you got there fighting, and now you don't realize that you can't stop fighting.
That's quite interesting. So how do we then push back, or I guess the way to say this is, how exactly do we push back against this measure of our professional abilities that are sort of decided for us just because of our gender? How exactly do we push back on this?
So I think it's incredible the effect of conversations and media on a lot of things. I referenced Mrs. Ibukwa-Woshika. I mean, we've done quite a good job recently with women in leadership positions, certainly in the private sector. We fail very, very poorly on elected positions. And I referenced some of those reasons. I may not have unpacked them, but I referenced some of those reasons when I talked about how are you actually measuring criteria for promotion. If the requirement for politics, for example, is all the meetings are in the middle of the night, all the things are, like in the spirit world, where are you going to say you are going? Right? Yeah. So this is the thing. Like, when you begin to have the conversations and confront, you see, we have to stop behaving like there are elephants in the room. We must name. You see, there is power in naming something. Right. When you name a problem, already you have diminished its impact. And so conversations like that, that's why the first thing I said to Sheila, after this, you have to make a plan. You can't just be talking about the needs of female bosses only to women. You have to talk about them with men, or you have to make sure that men are listening to the conversations. Because, at the end of the day, that is how we begin to mainstream these particular issues. We talk about normalize this, normalize that. Normalize the female boss. Normalize her in her perfections and in her imperfections. We are not going to be the perfect female boss. An asshole is an asshole. A mean person is a mean person. Are they good at their job? Why do we allow for men to be good at their work and poor on social skills, but we don't accord the women with the same latitude? It's because of stereotypes, of bias. Women are supposed to be nice. They are the homemaker. That's why you'll be in the office, and anytime there's small chops, they'll say you're the only one that can sort out small chops. You're the only one that can sort out the entertainment for food. You're the only one that knows where to find a DJ. And so I used to confront those things in the office. I'm like, I'm sorry, what is it about me that says and I'm saying this as someone who actually enjoy planning convivial things and so on. But I realized there was a stereotype. And so I actively had to start to delegate these things. And that's what I'm saying about being aware and being alert to potential pitfalls. You have to keep your wits about you.
Right. So, okay, great. I thought we froze for a second. So I want to ask a question with regards to your experiences. Now, you've managed teams and you're still managing teams. And just like you said, the person who invited you for this event is someone that you've managed in the past. Have you ever had like scenarios where you feel like, maybe your colleagues or people who report to you see you as a mean person just because you had a firm stand or something, or you were being assertive at that particular time, or in general?
So the thing is, and it's funny because one thing we have to recognize is that this bias against women bosses is not confined to men.
Right. Yes.
It's not confined to men. Women have the most, I would say it's equal, right? So there are times when a woman is reacting to a woman in a subordinate position is reacting to your authority. And it could be for any number of reasons, but she's going to pick on the fact that you share a gender. And that's a problem. So I've had a situation where I've been in charge of a woman who's had a problem. Almost before I open my mouth. And this happens to a lot of women. Almost before, once they know that it's a woman. So my name is unusual because it's not particularly gendered.
Right.
Tolagbe is a unisex Yoruba name. So there have been times when you might get an email from a Tolagbe, and then when you hear the voice, you're like, oh, you didn't realize. And then I begin to unpack the next set of expectations that come from that. Especially now with my last name being Martin. So you are not sure, is this a man, is it a woman? Where is she from? And or where are they from? So it's incredibly anonymous. I realized how powerful that anonymity was when I would have had engaged in correspondence with people and everything would have been fine. Then maybe one phone call, they realize you're a woman, and then they're like, oh, you see, that is visceral contact with the bias. Right. So everyone reacts to, I have you at home. I have your type. I make a joke a lot about how stressful it was to be pregnant in the workplace. Because suddenly, every subordinate man feels like, so after all that, somebody has, look at it now. Because again, so they are expressing all their frustration, all their fantasies of dominion are now like visible. So look at it. After all this, you're carrying somebody's child. And you don't even realize how much maybe the thing has been peppering them till, you show up with a belly and you realize. So I need us to understand that we are, this is a real, it is probably one of the biggest crises of our generation. And particularly for those of us who are going on to raise children in this, recognizing the parity of gender. And I use parity, and I don't use equality because that takes us into another thing. But the parity, which is like for like, role for role, person for person, we are the same.
Yes, we are. We definitely are. But then it brings me some, because, we're just talking about, how women feel. So it actually amazes me when you see women that feel like female bosses. They would rather have a male boss than have a female boss, even though it really shouldn't be about gender. It should be about, is this person a good person or not, right?
Exactly.
So do you feel like there's this sense of entitlement? So just because we're off, because you don't see men doing this. You don't see men saying, oh, because he's a man, he should understand my problems, right? But you find that with women, you get that it's almost like gender being used as a card for incompetence.
Yeah.
And so do you find that, there's that thing of entitlement, like when you, especially when you're managing like women, do you see that there's that entitlement just because we're the same kind? Or is it just a general, female bosses, that's it?
I think as a manager, it's important to address whatever the issues might be, confront them specifically. And I mean, we all know in very real terms, if you have a team member with extremely bad period pains, for example, maybe someone who's suffering from endometriosis or someone who's had multiple miscarriage, someone who's going through stuff, right? I think it behooves you to be empathic to such a thing and make the required accommodations. Almost before they say something, if you understand the gravity of what they're going through, then you should be making, and I said accommodations, it's not a free pass. Mm-hmm. It's okay, maybe you're working from home for this day, but I still expect, I need to get my work. Because we all know that sometimes the sheer effort of getting up, getting dressed, you would have finished the work that you were going to do, and you could go and lie down, in very practical terms. What you don't want, I feel like there's two things happening here. As a manager, you're also in a position to begin to effect the change in the culture that is so important that we begin to see. I think if you are in the room, your voice has to speak up for such things. It's not just HR that will speak up all the time. As a manager who happens to be a woman, and this extends to everything. My team members, when I managed big teams, I used to insist that the guys, if your wife had a baby, I said, I don't want to see you in the office for this was before, but I was like, I don't want to see you in the office for the next 3 days. We'll talk to you on the phone if we need something from you. That is a small thing that I was empowered to do to begin to affect the culture. Fine, I could not get full-scale paternity leave, right? But I could get us to begin to see that fatherhood is as critical as motherhood in its own way. If nothing else, the father is supporting the mother at this particular time, right? So you do have that responsibility. You do have the responsibility sometimes to address the elephant in the room, as I said before. If you feel like, look, there's been times when I've had to call someone in the room and be like, come, see, what's going on? Is it, did you like this guy? What's going on? Maybe the colleague, is there something, am I missing something? What's the nuance here that I'm not missing? I've walked in, did something happen? Is it, do you have sometimes you have to speak these things so that you steer clear of being that bitch boss, right? And I think also learning, so something that I didn't write here, but I think is really, really important is learning to modulate your emotions so that, do you know that Margaret Thatcher had to have elocution classes when she began running for Prime Minister? And that's because for most women, when we're agitated or excited, we get quite shrill. You go quite high pitched. I'm a very squeaky person when I'm very animated, right? And at the time, obviously this being the 70s and the 80s, she had to learn to modulate so that not only would her voice carry in the room, she couldn't be accused of being that hysterical female. So there are certain stereotypes you must confront head on. The one of being emotional, you must try not to cry. I'm not saying crying is bad, but you see, there will be so many things being weaponized against you that crying will be like, oh, look at her. After we told her off, she suddenly went and got emotional. Remember, emotional is a dirty word, right? So again, you're trying to navigate this, staying true to yourself, but naming. So I would say you're naming the issues, you're addressing them, you're confronting. That's to say, be direct. Passive aggressiveness is a tool that's not just women, right? Everybody, it's something you must all grow out of. In the workplace, we confuse not wanting to offend with then maybe sulking. You can't do that. You have to address it, and you must develop your conflict resolution strategies so that you are able to communicate how you are feeling in an emotionless way.
That's interesting. So I have a question here, right? So okay says, granted in your words that they are, a-holes across every gender.
Sorry.
But what happens when you have to engage with a female boss that actually plays into these biases? So like, you get a job and your female boss is everything that the bias and the myth that has been said about female bosses. What happens? How do you manage that situation? What do you have to do
So
to manage the situation?
That's a toxic situation, right? And I would say, regardless of whether your boss was a woman or a man, if you are in a toxic situation, there are certain strategies that you have to employ. The first is you have to be very strategic. You have to document everything. Right? That thing of documenting everything is so important when you're dealing with a toxic boss. You have to be firm about your boundaries, because when you give the person an inch, they will take a mile.
Right.
So back to the documenting thing, you're sending emails, and that's what happens. You become that person that after a meeting, you say, "Dear Sheila, thanks so much. As discussed, these are the tasks." Time, date stamped. You are making sure that as much as possible, you're keeping your interactions professional.
Right.
And you're also on Jobberman looking for another job. Because like toxic workplaces, there is almost no cure for them, really and truly. So, I mean, until and unless that person is isolated or identified, especially if, and you see, this is the thing about workplaces. They're an ecosystem. This person who's a toxic boss might be bringing in the biggest deals, right? So everybody knows the person is toxic, but they are managing them. Your personal career development is your responsibility and your growth. Being able to manage a toxic person in the workplace is an important skill set, but you can't do it for a long time. You can't do it forever. So document, keep your boundaries, and don't take it personally.
So that's so, I mean, document, keep your boundaries, don't take it personally. I hope that answers your question. Okay.
They've already laughed at me saying that.
But in a way, it is a toxic environment, and regardless of gender, it's something that you should get yourself out of one way or the other. And so I'm just listening, and we're having this conversation, and then realize that, okay, fine, there's all these biases, but at the end of the day, how come it's the women who get these stereotypes than the men? I mean, so it's like, granted, yes, women are supposed to be softer, right? So it's like, it's interestingly, I'll give myself an example, right? So I tend to walk my mother calls it authoritatively when I walk. I walk fast. I walk, very like, I need to get to where I'm going to. That's really how I walk. And so every time my mom will say, stop, walk like a woman. Like, stop looking so strong. You need to calm down. And I find it very interesting that she says that a lot because she's not exactly that type, but it's okay. So it now comes back to this whole thing about, if it's just about us, you're either a good person or a bad person, right? Regardless of gender, you're either good or bad. Why are women constantly being judged? It's like, we're both bad people. why should I be judged more for being bad, even though the other gender might be worse than I am, you know? So it just comes back to that, like, why is it that women are judged more? Why is it that female bosses are judged more? And that's one question. And then my second question would be, do you find that as women, we tend to want to have masculine traits just so that we can be taken seriously in the workplace? So it even boils down to our dressing. For instance, you know, sometimes you want to wear, it's called like a power suit. So every time you see a woman and say, oh, she has a power suit on, it's just, she's just dressed more masculine-ish than quote unquote feminine, right? Do you find that as women, we have to sort of adapt or take like masculine traits so that we can be seen serious, just to fit in, basically? So that's two questions.
Yeah. So I think the first one, why do we judge women more harshly than men? You know, this question, if I had the answer to it, I would be a billionaire, because I pointed out presidential candidates. I pointed out, you know, anybody in a high profile position. Women are unfairly, I would say unfairly, and much more heavily judged than men for the same actions. And I gave an example in a study of the same person sending emails, and the person was failing as a woman and passing as a man, right? We have found, for example, that when you, and this applies to all forms of research, all forms of studies, when you take off gender and you submit the work, you know, and you submit it blind, when it's evaluated, when you take gender off as a lens, the scores for women go up and the scores for men come down. And this is like in every field, in every sphere. So we are confronting a culture that says women belong at home. They don't belong in the workplace. I gave a timing when I said women came into the workforce. And so we have to remember two things here. That we're dealing with a Western post-colonial culture. Because you see, if we were to go and unpack how our women were pre-colonial times, you know, we're having a completely different conversation, right? But this is where we find ourselves, post-colonial Nigeria, post-colonial Africa. So this is where we are at. Post-World War II, post-World War, First World War and Second World War is when women really came into the workplace, because the men, one, went to war, and then two, died. So they needed women to work. Then we had another jump, women coming into the workforce, when birth control became accessible, which was in the 60s. So really, we're only dealing with, 50 years of women actively working, given the Western timeline that we're dealing with. It's still an anomaly. My mother is only about to be 70, and she was like 3% of her medical school class. And she will tell you every year people were dropping out because the pressure was too much. And everybody kept asking her, why won't you just be a nurse? So we must recognize that this journey is a long one. The attempt to balance the scales is going to take a while. Every single one of us here is still a pioneer, still pushing it, right? And so the idea that it's all going to change overnight, nah. You are confronting this bias every day. But at the end of the day, you have to try and enjoy your life, because problems don't finish. You have to try to make your own mark. You carry this weight, but you cannot let it define you or burden you either. So you must do what is true to you. And that's really what life is about. The people that don't want to work, that just want to be relaxed and to be taken care of, they are valid. The people that want to slay corporate dragons, they are also valid. The people that want to build their own empires, also valid. And I think that's actually the critical thing here. The biases aren't going to change. All you can do is each time represent a different narrative. We've seen it in sport now. Look at Serena Williams, Naomi Osaka. There is a Naomi Osaka today because there was a Serena Williams. There is a Kamala Harris today because there was a Shirley Chisholm, because there was a Hillary Clinton. That's all you can do. Just continue to try to push the barrier forward. Try to dispel the myth that you can do. But it's only the one you can do. It's only the one you can do. You must not do the one you cannot do. And I think I really say that because the activist life is not for most of us. But these conversations are important. You continue to show the existence of women thriving. There's a lady on here, she will not want me to show her, but like she is a boss of bosses. I've seen her on here, right? And I know what like a dichotomy that she's existing with. I know the cultures that she's juggling and still slaying these dragons. So at the end of the day, you just do the best that you can. No, that I honestly, I know we're almost out of time. I want to end there, that you really just do the best that you can.
Yeah, that even just answers that's the next question I was going to ask, because I was going to ask you, so as women growing in our careers, how do we break that myth? I mean, with everything that we have talked about today, it's kind of like, how do we break that myth as women growing in our careers? Because, you know, you might just be, I mean, for people who are part of this meeting today, you might just be like, yes, you started as entry level, but then you end up in mid-level, and from mid-level you end up in senior management. How do we break that myth? And one of the things that I have picked up from everything that you've said is like, identify your strengths, knowing what works, not works for you. Also, calling the problem by name. Whatever it is, like whatever the elephant in the room is, you know, calling it by name. So those are two things that I picked out. I don't know if there's, yes.
I would also say something else, which is pick women. Pick women. You can't, you don't improve things. You build a longer table and you call more people to eat. So pick women. I unapologetically pick women for everything and anything I can. I pick women. And that's why I say God has laughed at me by giving me 2 boys, because it's like, hey, so you're picking women now. See, oh yeah, go and pick. But I pick women. I pick women. If there are 2 people that are qualified, this is only women here, so I can say there are 2 people that are qualified, and I will pick the woman. Honestly, I pick women, because the only way to show something is to do the thing and to be the thing. Once it becomes ubiquitous, then it shouldn't even be worthy of comment. Normalize women. Normalize all women teams. Normalize women bosses. We've been normalizing everything this year. So let's normalize this too.
All right. Thank you so much, Tolagbe. I don't know if anyone has any questions. We're almost out of time. It's always like, we are valid, pick women, and relax.
Yes. And then find me on my socials. That's the other thing I was
saying. Yes, please. So if you find you on your socials, if you can share.
So
yes. Tolasoul and tolagbe.com. So thank you so much, Tolagbe. And
thank you, Jobberman. This was fun.
Yes, it was. It really was. So just from my end again, just saying that yes, we have the Jobberman soft skills training. You should sign up for it. There's something that we talked about, emotional intelligence, and how it's important to have emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence happens to be one of the things, or one of the courses on the soft skills training that we have at Jobberman. So please go register. It's jobberman.com/soft skills. I mean, there are other things you can learn: your employability, networking, communication, intelligence, emotional intelligence, business etiquette, creativity, innovation, so many things, right? before I end up listing out everything on our course. But please go register, jobberman.com/soft skills. We are also on Coursera at the moment. Yay. In addition to that, if you happen to be in a toxic situation like Tolagbe mentioned, don't forget to check the jobberman.com platform.
Yeah.
Where you can actually find, and even if you're not in a toxic situation and you're just trying to grow in your career, or you're looking at your next opportunity in your career, please check jobberman.com for the different job opportunities that are listed there. Like I said before, we have over 60,000 employers listed on our platform, which means there's always a vacancy on the platform. And all you have to do as a job seeker is to ensure that your profile is complete to 100%. And then once your profile is complete, then you can actually boost your profile, and then you can get seen. If you have any problems with your CV, we also have a CV services as well. And when I say problems, sometimes we don't really know how to put ourselves together. And this is specifically for women as well. So most times as women on our CVs, we tend to downplay our responsibilities and our achievements. So please, by all means, contact the CV services of Jobberman, and we'll also be able to review your CV as well, and help you get that next top level job that you're looking for. On that note, you can connect with us. If you want to send us an email, it's connect@jobberman.com. You can also look out for us on Jobberman and Jobberman Nigeria on LinkedIn. Follow us on Twitter, jobberman.com, on Instagram, Jobberman Nigeria, and jobbermanyouth.ng. And finally, obviously on Facebook, just search for Jobberman Nigeria. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, Tolagbe. I had so much fun. We hope to have more of you and invite you for more sessions.
Yeah, I'm coming back to do a grammar ministry. This
oh,
is
really?
important.
Okay, fine. We'll make that happen. All right, then. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.